We were halfway through dinner, roasted chicken, salad, and a bottle of cheap white wine, when my wife, Camille, looked up from her plate and dropped the bomb like she was asking me to pass the salt. By the way, she said, casual as can be, my brother Wade and the kids will be moving in with us next month. She didn't even blink. No warning. No conversation. Just that, like it was some minor detail she'd forgotten to mention earlier while setting the table. I had a fork halfway to my mouth when she said it. The chicken, golden and fragrant, suddenly tasted like cardboard. I stared at her, blinking once, then again, as if that might somehow rewrite what I just heard. Her parents, seated across from us, nodded approvingly like judges scoring a performance they'd secretly rehearsed with her. Her sister clapped once, a little too enthusiastically, as though this was a celebratory moment, a triumph of familial love and generosity. And me? I said nothing. Not because I was okay with it, but because I couldn't trust myself to speak without rage curling under every syllable. I looked around the table, every face too comfortable, too certain that this was a given. That I would, of course, be fine with it. The silence stretched for exactly 4 seconds, long enough for Camille to sip her wine and smile like she'd just organized a surprise party I'd be thrilled about. Wade needs a bit of time to get on his feet, she added, her tone light, as if we were talking about borrowing a ladder or lending someone a book. The boys are excited. Jaden wants the room with the bay window. That was my office. My sanctuary. The one place in the house untouched by clutter, toys, and chaos. I'd spent years carving out that room, shelves perfectly lined, blinds adjusted just right, my grandfather's desk positioned where the late afternoon sun would hit. Now, apparently, it was being claimed by an 8-year-old with no warning. Still, I didn't argue. Not yet. Not at that table, surrounded by her family, where anything I said would be twisted into selfishness or stinginess. Camille's parents had a knack for making me feel like an outsider in my own home, like my opinions were tolerated but rarely welcome. I glanced at the wine bottle. Almost empty. Camille was pouring the last drops into her mother's glass. No one had noticed that I hadn't touched my food since the announcement, because they didn't care. I chewed slowly and nodded absently when someone made a joke about Wade's cooking skills, or lack thereof. The conversation drifted into harmless banter. I heard phrases like good for the boys, family sticking together, and temporary, of course. But none of it mattered. They were all operating under the illusion that this was already decided, set in motion. And who was I to disrupt such a lovely, generous plan? The part they didn't know, the part one hadn't told Camille, not yet, was that I'd already sold the house. A month ago. It wasn't impulsive. It was the product of too many moments like this. The casual disregard. The taken-for-granted sacrifices. The mounting sense that I was a guest in the life I built. So I took action. Quietly. Methodically. The way I handle most things in life. I called Leah, our real estate agent, the one who sold us the house in the first place. Told her to keep things discreet. We listed it privately, targeting out-of-state buyers. The market was good. The house went under contract in 2 weeks. A couple from Portland, newly married, both remote workers, had fallen in love with the bay window just like I had. The paperwork was signed. Inspections passed. Closing was scheduled for the Thursday before Wade's big arrival. I sipped water, my throat tight from holding back too many words. Camille leaned over and touched my hand gently, as if expecting praise. I know it's sudden, she said softly, but this'll be good for everyone. You'll see. I smiled. It was the kind of smile you wear when you're sinking but don't want anyone to see you drowning. After dinner, I helped clear the table. Listened to Camille's sister go on about wallpaper patterns for the guest room, which apparently was being transformed into a play space. I nodded, made polite noises, washed dishes while they plotted the redecoration of a home that was no longer theirs. When they left and the door finally clicked shut, Camille looked at me expectantly. You're awfully quiet tonight, she said. Just tired, I replied, drying my hands. Long week. She came over, kissed my cheek, and whispered, thank you for being so understanding. I kissed her back, said nothing, and went upstairs. There were only 4 weeks left, and they had no idea. I'm Milo Tran, 40 years old. Accountant. Steady. Predictable. I'm the kind of guy who pays off credit cards early, checks the tire pressure before road trips, and triple checks the weather before stepping outside. If you looked up low-maintenance husband in the dictionary, there'd probably be a picture of me with a clipboard and a satisfied sigh. Camille used to call me her anchor. Said I kept her grounded. Lately, though, it felt like being grounded just meant I was the one expected to never lift off. Never object. Never matter. Camille's the opposite of me. She's bold, spontaneous, emotionally generous to a fault, especially when it comes to her family. And lately, that generosity has come at the expense of my patience, my time, and most frustratingly, my home. Wade is her brother, her younger brother. And if Camille is a whirlwind of impulsive affection, Wade is the aftermath of poor decisions and half-baked promises. He's 35, with the energy of a teenager and the responsibility level of a wet napkin. 2 kids from 2 different mothers, neither around anymore. No steady job, no real plan, just that ever-present smirk that says, "Don't worry, I'll figure it out." Except he never does. Camille's parents say he's just going through a rough patch. That patch has lasted 5 years. I can't count the number of times I've fixed Wade's messes. A borrowed car with no gas. Rent payments almost covered. A laptop that needed replacing for job opportunities that never panned out. And now, apparently, my home had become another extension of his entitled safety net. Like someone else could promise it on my behalf, and I just nod along like the good, silent husband. I stood in the living room that night, after Camille went to bed, and stared at the framed photos on the mantel. Us on our wedding day. Her parents smiling beside us. Wade, blurry in the background, holding a beer even though we'd agreed it was a dry reception. Fitting, really. Always the background. Always hanging on the edge of someone else's moment. The thing that grated me most wasn't just that Camille had told me Wade and his kids were moving in. It was the way she'd done it, like it was a decision already made, and I was just the last to be notified. A footnote. A final CC in the group email. That's the role I've been playing more and more these past few years. Always the last to know. I'm not unreasonable. If Camille had come to me and said, "Can we talk about this?" Wade's in trouble, I would have listened. I might have even agreed, begrudgingly, to let him stay for a short time. But she didn't. She announced it. Over dinner. In front of her whole family. Like I was the groundskeeper and they were the board of trustees. I walked into my office, my sanctuary, the one with the bay window and perfectly organized bookshelves. The desk lamp cast a soft glow across the polished wood surface, the one place in the house that was purely mine. And even that had been offered up like a donation. "Jaden wants this room," she'd said. The words echoed in my mind like a bell tolling for my boundaries. Camille hadn't even hesitated. And I knew how it would go. Jaden would want a space for his video games. Max, the younger one, would need a nightlight and a routine that shifted my mornings. Wade would drink my coffee, clog my sink, and borrow things until they disappeared. I opened my laptop and clicked into the property folder I created a month ago. The house was under contract, the inspection done. Closing date, April 4th. The new owners had sent an email that morning, thanking me for the smooth process. They were excited about their fresh start. I read their message again, and I couldn't help but think, so am I. Camille's voice drifted from upstairs, muffled through the walls. She was watching something on her tablet, probably one of those home makeover shows she loved. I wondered if she'd ever consider our marriage in need of renovation. Or maybe, to her, I was just part of the original layout, solid, serviceable, and easy to ignore. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, hands folded behind my head. I thought about the Savannah offer. Ronald had mentioned it over lunch once, casually, like tossing a lifeline. Less stress, more flexibility. You'd like it there, Milo. Quiet town, good people. At the time, I brushed it off. Now, it felt like the only real door left open. The thing is, I wasn't angry, not the loud, breaking things kind of angry. I was tired. Tired of being the last to know, the one who swallowed his pride for the sake of peace, while everyone else made plans with my name scribbled faintly in the margins. So that night, I made a decision. A firm, quiet one. Not for revenge. Not even out of spite. Just for me. The kind of decision you make when you realize you've been nodding along to a life you didn't sign up for. I wasn't going to be the last to know anymore. I was going to be the first. Camille's reasoning was simple. Too simple. Their family, she said, as if that was the trump card to end all conversations. As if blood ties gave her brother a blank check to our space, our resources, our peace. My problem was just as simple. I was family too. Or at least I thought I was. We had sat in the same kitchen, at the same old oak table where we'd made our first mortgage payment together, when she tried to justify it. It's just until Wade finds a new job, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee like she hadn't just bulldozed my last nerve. He's really trying this time, Milo. I didn't answer. I just nodded, because that's what I'd been conditioned to do, make things easier. For her family. Even if it chipped away at me in pieces. She took my silence as agreement. That was her gift, Camille, interpreting what she wanted from the things I didn't say. She didn't notice the way I flinched when she referred to my office as the guest room. She didn't ask why the internet bill was no longer in my name, or why my gym bag had been permanently moved to the trunk of my car. Wade's last apartment had been a disaster zone. It wasn't even an opinion, it was a fact. Broken furniture, stained carpets, a mildew smell that lingered in the walls. The landlord threatened to sue. Camille claimed Wade had changed, that he was focused now. I had no idea what that meant, considering the last job he had was a failed YouTube channel and a pyramid scheme involving essential oils. Her parents agreed with her, of course. They always did. The Tramores had a way of wrapping dysfunction in ribbons and calling it devotion. Camille's dad said things like, family sticks together, and her mom offered helpful gems like, Wade's just misunderstood. Meanwhile, I was expected to give up the one place in the house that was still mine. My office wasn't just a room with a desk, it was my routine, my reset. The only space where I could hear myself think. I'd curated that room like a museum exhibit. Books in alphabetical order, a wall calendar with all my deadlines, a framed photo of my dad from the year he taught me about compound interest. But now, apparently, that square footage was reserved for Jaden and his Lego kingdom. 1 week after that dinner, I came home from work to find Camille in the guest room with color swatches pinned to the wall. Soft blues, primary reds, jungle-themed wallpaper samples. For the boys, she said, beaming. Jaden wants dinosaurs, but Max is obsessed with space stuff. I think we can blend the two. I watched as she placed 2 new twin mattresses against the wall, still in their plastic wrap. A folded bunk bed manual sat on the chair where I used to read reports and sip my evening tea. How's Wade doing? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Better, she said, not looking at me. He's been looking at apartments, but I told him to just come here for now. It's easier for the kids. They need stability. I almost laughed. Stability? From Wade? That man changed phone numbers like socks and didn't know how to use a calendar. The only consistent thing about Wade was the trail of broken promises he left behind. I didn't argue with her. Instead, I went upstairs, opened the safe behind our bedroom closet, and pulled out the contract. The house sale was almost complete, just a few signatures left. The couple buying it had offered above asking. No contingencies. A dream transaction. What Camille didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd started this process quietly, right after Wade's last career fell through. Something inside me had shifted that day. I'd looked around our house, seen the way Camille's family floated in and out like they owned the place, and realized I was done. I was done being the background character in my own story. I met with Leah over lunch 2 days later. We sat in a quiet cafe off Baxter Street. She'd sold us the house 7 years ago and remembered how Camille had insisted on the open floor plan while I calculated property taxes on a napkin. I want to sell, I told her. Quietly. Her eyebrows rose. Camille, no? Not yet. She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, I'll keep it off public listings. But you'll need to move quick. Spring market's heating up. I've already started packing, I said, and it was true. Box by box, drawer by drawer, I'd been transferring everything I cared about into a storage unit across town. Camille had noticed, of course. She'd asked once, and I told her I was decluttering. She smiled and said it was so like me. She had no idea. That night, I lay in bed beside her while she scrolled through Pinterest boards for cozy kid corners and shared boy spaces. I stared at the ceiling and counted backward from 100. Her voice buzzed beside me like white noise. Plans, ideas, paint samples, dreams. Dreams that didn't include asking me what I wanted. And all I could think was, I've already made my choice. They just don't know it yet. The moment didn't come with a dramatic flash or a loud argument. No storm clouds or shattering glass. Just a conversation overheard over clinking forks and idle gossip at Camille's cousin's birthday dinner. An overpriced affair at a fusion restaurant where everything was plated like art and tasted like confusion. I had stepped away from the table, refilling my water at the sidebar, when I caught her mother's voice. It cut through the room, clear as a bell. Once Wade and the kids are settled, maybe Milo can crash somewhere else. A short-term rental or something. That's reasonable, right? Her aunt laughed. Not politely. Not nervously. Loudly. With delight. Honestly, it might be better for everyone, she said, as if I were a set of mismatched luggage someone was finally brave enough to leave behind. I stood there for a second too long, the glass of water cold in my hand, the words echoing like a bell tower collapsing inside my skull. I didn't move. I didn't interrupt. I just let their voices wrap around me like a noose I hadn't realized they were tightening. Better for everyone. That was when it clicked. This wasn't a temporary arrangement. This wasn't just until Wade finds his footing. This was a planned transition, an unspoken family consensus. Camille had offered them my house, my space, my life, and now her family was strategizing where to put me. Like I was a worn-out love seat, too sentimental to throw away, but inconvenient to keep in the main room. I walked back to the table and took my seat. Camille smiled, unaware. Her hand slipped into mine under the table, her thumb drawing lazy circles across my skin like everything was fine. Normal. Loving. I stared at her, and I thought, you really don't see me anymore. The table burst into laughter again. Someone made a joke about Wade being a house dad now, and Camille joined in like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just handed off our future without blinking. I didn't eat much after that. I barely spoke. No one noticed. And that, too, told me everything I needed to know. They didn't notice when I left early. Claimed I had an early meeting. Camille kissed my cheek and waved me off without suspicion. She turned back to her wine before I even reached the door. I got into my car, sat in the quiet for a long moment, and just breathed. Then I smiled. Not out of joy, but out of clarity. They had no idea the house was already under contract. No idea that in 3 weeks, a couple from out of state would be holding the keys to their fantasy. I drove to the storage unit that night, unloaded 3 more boxes, tax documents, my grandmother's old china set, a framed photo from my college graduation. Each item tucked away, sealed and labeled, a quiet promise to myself. Camille had started redecorating the guest room. There were paint samples in the garage, new curtains already ordered. She'd even created a spreadsheet, Wade move-in plan, which I'd stumbled upon accidentally when using her laptop. It had bullet points, deadlines, a grocery list. There wasn't a single note asking what I thought. In her world, I'd already stepped aside. And maybe, in a way, I had. But not for the reasons she assumed. Back at home, I climbed into bed next to her. She was already half asleep, murmuring something about needing to schedule the carpet cleaning. I watched her for a long time. Her hair tangled on the pillow, her breath slow and even. And I wondered when, exactly, we'd become strangers occupying the same house. I remember the early years, our first nights in this very bed, eating takeout from paper boxes, laughing until our stomachs ached. I remembered the promises, the plans, the way she used to ask what I thought before deciding what she wanted. Now, I was just expected to nod, to fund, to disappear. And they had no idea I already had. 3 weeks. That's all. Then the new owners would arrive, James and Claire Ingwin, a young couple from Portland, newlyweds. They'd sent me an email just last week, asking if I could recommend any good coffee shops in the area. They were thrilled about the bay window, said it would make the perfect reading nook. I'd smiled reading it. I used to sit there every Sunday morning, coffee in hand, silence in the air. Before Camille started using the living room for video calls, before her parents dropped by without calling, before Wade's impending invasion turned my peace into collateral damage. I'd smiled reading it. I used to sit there every Sunday morning, coffee in hand, silence in the air. Before Camille started using the living room for video calls, before her parents dropped by without calling, before Wade's impending invasion turned my peace into collateral damage. I stood by the window that night and looked out at the yard. The garden Camille's mom claimed as hers. The patio Wade wanted to use for weekend barbecues. The garage her dad had offered to organize before he even asked if I wanted the help. Let them dream. Let them plan. The truth was already in motion. And when the day came, when the papers were signed, and the door no longer belonged to any of them, they would finally see what it felt like to be uninvited. I woke up the next morning before the alarm, already rehearsing the conversation in my head. Ronald had offered the Savannah transfer 2 months ago, quietly, over coffee, after I'd saved one of our biggest clients from a tax penalty that could have wrecked their business. "You ever get tired of all this, Milo?" he'd asked, motioning to the window overlooking the gridlocked city. "We've got space in the Savannah office. Less chaos. More control. Think about it. Back then, I wasn't ready. I still believed Camille and I could recalibrate. That maybe, with a few hard conversations and a little therapy, we'd find our footing again. But after that dinner with her family, after realizing how deeply they'd cut me out of my own future, I didn't need time to think anymore. I just needed to act. I called Ronald at 8:01 a.m. If the offer's still on the table, I said, I'll take Savannah. He didn't hesitate. It's yours. I'll send the transfer papers by noon. Take a few days to get settled. We'll help with the relocation costs. I thanked him, then hung up and immediately called Leah. She picked up on the second ring, her voice bright as always. Milo, everything's still on schedule. Buyers are thrilled. Walkthrough is tomorrow. Want to be there? I glanced around the house, at the framed wedding photos still hanging on the wall, at the potted plant Camille always forgot to water, at the stack of family board games we hadn't touched in over a year. No, I didn't need a walkthrough. I needed out. No need, I said. Just make sure the keys get to them. And Leah, yeah, can you find me something small? Cozy. 1 bedroom. Savannah sighed. She paused just long enough to mean something. You're not telling her, are you? No, I said. Not yet. She didn't judge me. Just nodded through the phone. I'll send you listings this afternoon. With that, the gears started turning. My life, my new life, was being built beneath the surface of the one everyone thought I'd accepted. Over the next few days, I worked like a man escaping a prison of velvet walls and polite suffocation. I packed in secret, methodical as always. My books went first, row by row, wrapped in newspaper, labeled by genre. Then my work files, the ones I didn't trust, to cloud storage. I moved sentimental things quietly, photos, old journals, the sweater my dad gave me in college. The bookshelf in my office started looking thinner, the corners a little barer. Camille noticed once. It was a Wednesday evening. She was filling out school forms for Jaden and Max, acting like they were already registered in a district they didn't belong to. Are you decluttering? She asked, eyeing the open boxes by the hall closet. I looked up from my laptop and gave her the kind of easy smile I'd learned to weaponize. Yeah, just thinning out what we don't use. She smiled back. That's so you. She didn't ask what I was keeping, or where it was going. The garage sale came next, a perfect excuse to move furniture without suspicion. I told her I wanted to start fresh with the decor. She thought it was my way of making space for Wade and the kids. See, she said, beaming at her mother when they came by to drop off storage bins. Milo's being amazing about this. He's really making room. They didn't know the room was no longer theirs to fill. I kept only what I needed. My clothes. A few kitchen essentials. My favorite books. A single chair. Everything else, sold, donated, or boxed into storage. By the end of the week, my life fit into a 2-room footprint. I drove down to Savannah that Saturday. It was early morning, the kind of dawn that smelled like freedom and sea salt. The condo Leah found me was perfect, brick-faced, small balcony, quiet street. It had character without chaos. No toys on the floor. No in-laws parked on the couch. Just stillness. I stood on that balcony, coffee in hand, looking out at a new world. The sun was rising, warm on my face. I could hear birds instead of the upstairs toilet running. It was the first time in years I'd felt peace instead of pressure. Back in the city, Camille was probably making brunch plans. Wade was likely measuring for bunk beds, talking about grilling setups for the patio. Her mother might have been rearranging our spice rack without asking. They were living inside a fantasy. But the paperwork was signed. The utilities were scheduled for transfer. The new owners were preparing to move in. And me? I was gone. Not angrily. Not spitefully. Just, finally. When Camille called that afternoon to say her sister was bringing over storage tubs for the kids' toys, I let it go to voicemail. She'd find out soon enough. And when she did, it wouldn't be because I shouted or slammed a door. It would be because she finally turned around and realized I wasn't standing behind her anymore. Saturday dinner. That sacred ritual Camille insisted we maintain no matter how busy, how tired, how fractured the week had been. This one was no different. Her family crowded the house like it was theirs by blood and deed, laughing over casserole dishes and clinking glasses as though nothing in the world could shatter their collective confidence. I watched them from the kitchen doorway, my plate in hand. Wade sat comfortably at the head of the table, my chair, discussing bunk beds and kid-proofing the backyard. Jaden and Max giggled in the living room, their video game music bleeding into the conversation like background noise. Camille was radiant, of course. She moved between guests like a perfect hostess, pouring wine, offering seconds, smiling so easily you'd think she wasn't orchestrating a quiet coup against the man who bought the roof over her head. Her father was mid-story about his golf game when Camille turned to me with the ease of someone asking about the weather. "Next weekend okay?" she asked, sliding a basket of bread toward her brother. "Wade's planning to bring the moving truck Saturday." Every fork stilled. Every eye turned to me. I forced a smile. "Yeah, should be fine." The words burned like acid on my tongue. Her sister leaned in. "I'll help with the garage. That space is perfect for toy storage, don't you think?" Her mother followed with a syrupy, "Do we have extra toothbrushes?" The boys always forget theirs. I said nothing. Just nodded. Just smiled. Just pushed mashed potatoes around my plate like a man clinging to the only thing still solid under his hands. Wade's voice was booming, comfortable. Too comfortable. "Gonna put the grill on the back patio. Once we're settled in, I'll have y'all over for burgers." You'd think he bought the place himself. No one noticed that I hadn't eaten more than a few bites. No one saw the tightness in my jaw or the tremor in my hand when I reached for my glass of water. They didn't see me because they didn't look. I'd become part of the furniture, the wall, the floor they walked on without noticing. I watched Camille laughing with her niece, one hand already sketching plans for a chalkboard wall in the hallway. My hallway, my house, my life, repainted in colors I never chose. They all assumed I'd just move aside. Make room. Be grateful. What they didn't know was that the moving truck Wade was so excited about. It would arrive at an address that no longer belonged to me. I took a long sip of wine, barely tasting it. I had already forwarded my mail, already changed the billing addresses, already handed over the keys to Leah, who would deliver them to the Gwynns right after closing. The sale had been finalized 2 days earlier. Camille's name had never been on the deed. When the laughter dipped for a moment, Camille turned to me again. "You've been quiet," she said gently. "Just thinking," I replied, sipping again. "About the move?" I nodded. Something like that. And it was true. I was thinking about the move. Just not the one she thought I meant. I thought about the condo waiting for me in Savannah. The balcony. The peace. The space I wouldn't have to defend. I thought about waking up without the noise, the obligation, the constant expectation to sacrifice. They talked about painting over the guest room walls. About installing a trampoline in the yard. About turning my quiet life into something louder, messier, unrecognizable. And I let them talk. Let them enjoy their fantasy. Because this was the last Saturday dinner I would ever sit through. Eventually, Camille touched my knee under the table. "Thank you," she whispered, "for supporting this." I looked at her and felt a flicker of something grief, maybe, or disbelief. She really thought I was okay with all of this. She really thought I'd just adapt. I nodded, pressing my lips into a thin smile. She kissed my cheek, her wine-sweet breath brushing my skin. "I promise," she whispered, "this is going to work." And I wanted to ask, for who? But I didn't. I let her keep her hope a little longer. Let them all keep it. Dinner dragged on for another hour. The boys were sent to bed with kisses and promises. Wade helped himself to another beer from my fridge. Camille's parents left with leftovers and compliments about how lovely this new chapter would be. Her father clapped me on the back like I was a trusted lieutenant in a war I'd never signed up for. And I played my part. Until the house was quiet again. Camille yawned, leaning into my side. "You've really been amazing, Milo." I don't say it enough. I looked at her, this woman I once would have given anything for, and nodded. "Thanks." She smiled, kissed my shoulder, and padded off to bed, already humming something soft. I stood in the living room, lights dimmed, my plate still untouched on the end table. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound left in the house. In a week, all of this would collapse around them. And I wouldn't be here to see it. Not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Because sometimes silence is not surrender. Sometimes it's the sound of a door locking behind you, one you'll never open again. Saturday morning arrived like any other, but I was already gone. The sun hadn't fully crested the horizon when I poured my first cup of coffee and stepped onto the small balcony of my new condo in Savannah. The air was warm, a soft coastal breeze rustling the leaves of the tree just beyond the railing. From where I stood, I could hear distant gulls and the hum of early traffic, new sounds, quiet sounds. No footsteps. No bickering children. No voice from another room asking where the extra paper towels were kept. Just me. And silence. The movers had come 2 days earlier, right on schedule. Every item I cared about was now neatly in place. My desk in front of a bright, east-facing window, my books back on shelves, my clothes hanging in a closet I didn't have to share. My name was off the old utility bills. Mail forwarded. That house was no longer mine. And today was the day they would find out. I imagined the scene back in the old neighborhood unfolding like a poorly directed sitcom. Wade's truck pulling into the driveway. Jaden cradling his game console like treasure. Max probably dragging a beat-up teddy bear by one ear. Camille's mom with her foil tray of lasagna, proud and confident and blissfully unaware that the kitchen she expected to reheat it and didn't belong to us anymore. Then Gwen's had moved quickly after closing. The moment the keys were in their hands, they hired a cleaning crew, painted the foyer, and set up their living room with pristine white sofas and towering bookshelves. They were sweet people, James and Clara. Young, optimistic, eager to build a life. I liked them immediately. I felt no bitterness seeing someone else step into that house. Only relief. Gratitude, even. They turned a battleground into a home. Back in my condo, I topped off my coffee and pulled out a deck chair. I didn't have much on my walls yet, just one framed photo of my father and me fishing when I was 10, and a print of a quiet forest Camille never liked. She said it was too lonely. That morning, I couldn't think of a more beautiful word. I imagined the knock. Camille walking up the porch, smiling. Wade shouldering open the screen door like he owned the place. Jaden bounding ahead, yelling about where his bunk bed would go. Max clutching his bear. Her mother, chatting with her sister about where to put the recycling bin. Then, the door opening. But not for them. A stranger. Confused. Defensive. Rightfully so. I could practically hear the voices through time and distance. Camille's tone rising, shocked and indignant. Her mother demanding explanations. Wade trying to call me, pacing the lawn, phone to his ear. But I had turned it off. Last night, I powered down the phone and slid it into a drawer. Not airplane mode. Not do not disturb. Off. Done. My number was still the same for now, but I wasn't interested in hearing the outrage. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. They had made their plans without me, drawn up blueprints for a future I was never consulted about. They treated my silence as permission, my stability as something to exploit. So, I made a decision. I exited the play mid-act and took the script with me. Halfway through my second cup of coffee, a breeze lifted the edge of the newspaper I'd brought outside. I weighted it down with a coaster and leaned back, watching the sky lighten into soft hues of peach and gold. In another life, Camille would have been sitting beside me, legs curled under her, talking about everything and nothing. We used to share mornings like this, quiet, warm, filled with the kind of silence that wasn't absence but comfort. But that version of her had disappeared somewhere along the way, replaced by someone who didn't ask, only announced. Someone who assumed my life was a resource to be distributed. A reliable man meant to bend. And I'd bent. Until I didn't. In Savannah, no one expected anything from me. No one knew me as the accommodating husband or the reluctant in-law. Here, I was just Milo Tran. A man with a modest condo, a job transfer, and no obligations other than what he chose. I pulled out a small notepad from the table drawer and jotted down a few errands, groceries, a new lampshade, maybe a trip to the park I'd passed on the drive-in. I was starting over. Not out of drama, not even out of heartbreak, but because peace is a choice. And I'd finally made it. As the clock ticked past noon, I allowed myself one final thought of Camille and the circus likely playing out at our former address. The faces twisted in confusion. The voices raised. The sudden understanding that the man they all expected to stand silently by had quietly stepped away. And in that quiet, I found everything I had been missing. Freedom. Space. Stillness. I smiled into the breeze and took another sip of coffee. Let them knock. Let them shout. Let them feel, for once, what it's like to arrive uninvited. The phone started ringing around noon. Not just once, not just twice, but in waves. 32 missed calls by mid-afternoon. Camille, then her mother, then Wade. The same three names blinking across the screen over and over again like a fire alarm I refused to acknowledge. I'd left the phone on silent, face down on the kitchen counter beside a fresh loaf of sourdough and a half-drunk cup of tea. The tea was cold by the time I picked up the phone and looked at the call log. 32 missed calls, 5 voicemails, 2 text messages, and one unrelenting truth. They knew. I stood at the kitchen window, watching the shadows of the afternoon stretch across the parking lot below. Someone walked their dog. A couple argued in soft voices near a car with a missing hubcap. The world, as usual, kept turning, utterly indifferent to whatever meltdown was happening 3 hours north of me. I scrolled through the voicemails but didn't listen. I didn't need to hear them to know what they said. I could picture it all in my head. Camille's shock, her mother's outrage, Wade's disbelief. All of it tangled in the same arrogant certainty that had led them to believe the house would always be theirs. My patience, my silence, my presence, taken as permanent fixtures. Never questioned, never earned. The phone rang again. Call number 37. This time, I answered. Milo. Camille's voice exploded through the speaker, high-pitched and breathless. What is this? I took a slow breath. Hello, Camille. Don't you hello me, she snapped. We got here, and there are people living in our house. Strangers. Some woman opened the door in pajamas and told us to get off her property. That would be Claire and Gwen, I said calmly. She and her husband are the new owners. Lovely people. There was a pause. Just 1 second of silence. Then, the sound of her fury cracked like a whip. You sold our house? No, I replied, my voice level. I sold my house. You didn't even tell me. I didn't need to. Your name was never on the deed, Camille. Another pause. A different kind. Like she just remembered that little fact, and it was hitting her for the first time with the weight it deserved. You left us homeless, she said softly. Not angry this time. Hurt. Accusing. No, I said. I gave you options. You just didn't ask what I wanted. Ever. Milo, she began, her voice trembling now. You blindsided us. You God, my mother's crying. The boys are upset. Wade is pacing the lawn. That's not my lawn anymore. She let out a shaky breath. You could have told me. You should have told me. I tried, Camille, I said, stepping away from the window. For months. I tried with silence, with hesitation, with 1,000 small signals. But none of it mattered because you had already decided. Wade was moving in. The boys were taking over my office. Your family had already written the script. I was just supposed to show up and play my part. You didn't give us a chance to fix it. No, I agreed. Because I was done trying to fix what you wouldn't admit was broken. I'm exactly who you married, Camille. You just stopped seeing me. You stopped listening. And now that I've finally acted in my own interest, you're shocked. But maybe you should ask yourself why. She said nothing. For once, the silence was hers to carry. You have a family that will cushion your fall, I added after a moment. You'll be fine. Wade's resourceful, remember? You told me that 100 times. I don't want to talk about Wade, but he's the reason we're here. More silence. I'll be in touch, she said eventually. About, I did know. The divorce. Send whatever you need to my address in Savannah, I said. But Camille. Yeah, don't call again. I hung up without waiting for a response. And just like that, it was done. The phone, once again, went face down on the table. I sat there, surrounded by stillness, in a space that finally felt like mine. The fallout had arrived. And I was still standing. I didn't check the phone for 2 days. I changed the number on the 3rd. No farewell message, no explanation. Just logged into my provider's portal, selected a new line, and pressed confirm. Just like that, Camille, Wade, her mother, her father, all of them gone. Their access cut off like an unpaid subscription. If they wanted to reach me now, they'd have to try hard. And by then, I'd have no interest in hearing whatever desperate apology or backhanded justification they might finally cook up. The emails came next. At first, just the usual noise, spam, ads, promotional newsletters. Then one subject line stood out. You okay? From Kira, Camille's cousin. I clicked it open. Hey Milo. I know you probably don't want to hear from any of us, and that's fair. Just wanted to say, some of us are proud of you. Camille's at her parents' house. Wade's investment turned out to be fake. Shocker. They're all a mess. Her mom hasn't stopped complaining. But me? I think you did the right thing. I always wondered how you stayed so quiet through all their chaos. Now I get it. You were just waiting for the exit. Hope Savannah's peaceful. You deserve that. Kira. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I didn't believe her, but because it was the first message I'd received in years that asked nothing of me. No expectations. No manipulations. Just understanding. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. But I read it again before archiving it, letting it settle into my chest like a warm stone. By the end of that week, life began to shift into a gentle rhythm. Mornings started with quiet coffee on the balcony. I adopted a dog, a quiet black mutt named Jasper who had one floppy ear and a calm, steady presence. We understood each other immediately. During the day, I threw myself into work. The Savannah office was everything Ronald had promised, focused, low drama, and efficient. I got more done by lunch than I used to in a full day. People respected silence here. They didn't interpret it as weakness. They saw it as focus. Nights were different too. No voices bleeding through walls. No surprise visits from in-laws. No being asked to make room again and again until I'd all but disappeared from my own life. I joined a local book club. The group met every Thursday at a small cafe downtown, where we argued about character arcs and plot twists over pastries and coffee. They didn't know anything about my past, and I didn't offer it. Here, I was just Milo, soft-spoken accountant with sharp opinions about unreliable narrators. One night, a woman named Joanna sat beside me and made a joke about how every main character in modern fiction seemed to be either a brooding detective or a secret billionaire. I laughed. A real laugh. It felt good. Like my face remembered how. Ever think of writing one yourself? She asked. I shrugged. Never thought I had much of a story to tell. She raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? I wasn't. Not then. But the idea lingered. At the grocery store, I ran into an elderly man who asked if I could reach a box of cereal from the top shelf. I handed it down, and he nodded in approval. Good shoulders, he said. You still working or retired? Working, I replied. New to town. Start fresh. Something like that. He smiled. Best thing a man can do. Walk away before he forgets he knows how. I thought about that for days. On Sunday mornings, Jasper and I would walk the park trail that looped around a small lake. The same woman jogged past us each week, ponytails swinging, wireless earbuds tucked in, always smiling. She'd wave every time. The last time, she paused and asked Jasper's name. I told her. She introduced herself. Nora. Said maybe next week she'd bring treats. I said I'd bring coffee. It wasn't romance. Not yet. Maybe never. But it was something different. A beginning, not a compromise. One afternoon, while organizing my bookshelf, I pulled out an old photo. Camille and me on the porch of our old house, arms around each other, young and flushed with hope. I stared at it for a long time before sliding it into the back of the drawer. Not out of bitterness. Not out of pain. Just done. Camille once said I was a man who didn't take risks. That I clung to comfort like a crutch. What she never saw was that leaving her wasn't about abandoning my life. It was about finally claiming it. In Savannah, I wasn't Milo the pushover. I wasn't the in-law scapegoat. I wasn't the man standing at the edge of the dining room while decisions were made without him. I was Milo Tran, and I slept soundly. No footsteps in the hallway. No whispered plans in the kitchen. No voices discussing my living room like I didn't exist. Just me, Jasper, the occasional breeze from the coast, and a door I had closed, not out of anger, but with intention, with grace, and this time for good. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Plain white. No markings. No handwriting. Just my name printed in firm black ink, and a return address I recognized instantly, Camille's attorney. I didn't flinch, didn't curse, didn't even sigh. I just picked it up from the mail slot, tucked it under my arm, and carried it back inside like it was just another piece of junk mail. Inside my condo, Jasper trailed after me with curious eyes and a soft chuff. He'd become my shadow these past few months, quiet, present, never asking for more than I had to give. I set the envelope on the kitchen table, beside the dog's food bowl and a half-finished crossword puzzle. The sun was pouring through the balcony door, casting slow-moving shadows on the floor, and I let it all sit there for a while. Let the moment breathe. I already knew what was inside. No letter. No apology. Just divorce papers. Clean. Clinical. Final. Eventually, I opened it. Just as expected. Form after form, neatly clipped together, every checkbox filled, every signature line marked with a tap. Camille had made it efficient. I couldn't even be mad about that. It was the same way she had once organized our wedding, seamless, precise, detached in all the ways I used to mistake for strength. There was no note. No, I'm sorry. No, I didn't mean to. Not even a sticky note with a half-hearted, hope you're okay. Just the paperwork, asking for the last tie to be severed. I read every line. Took my time. Not because I had doubts, but because this moment deserved respect. This was the last chapter of something I had once believed would carry me through the rest of my life. It had failed, but not because of one decision or one betrayal. It had failed slowly, like a roof that starts leaking drop by drop until the foundation caves in. And no one ever hears the first strip. When I finished reading, I reached for my pen, signed every page, and slid the documents back into the envelope. Then I stood by the window, watching people walk past, couples, families, the same elderly man from the cereal aisle a week ago. He waved when he spotted me. I waved back. 6 months ago, I might have hesitated to mail that envelope. I might have clung to some thread of loyalty, some obligation to the years we spent building a life that turned out to be a scaffold over emptiness. But now? Now, I understood what I'd chosen. Peace over people-pleasing. Solitude over being surrounded but unseen. Self-respect over sacrifice. There were still moments that stung, brief, flickering images of what could have been. A Thanksgiving with laughter instead of quiet judgment. A Christmas tree trimmed by two people in love instead of a woman barking directions and a man pretending not to care. A life with a partner who saw me as more than just reliable background noise. Sometimes, when I passed family homes in my neighborhood, front yards scattered with toys, porches draped in lights, I felt a soft ache in my chest. That could have been mine. If I had folded just a little more. If I had absorbed just a little more of her family's needs, her brother's burdens, her mother's critiques. If I had continued to shrink myself to fit their vision. But I didn't. I chose differently. And that ache? It faded faster each time. Now, I woke up in a bed I chose, in a room arranged the way I liked it. I made coffee and didn't have to share the first cup. I read the paper without someone suggesting a chore list. I spoke only when I wanted to, not because someone expected me to fill the silence. Jasper and I walked the trail that evening. The air was crisp, with that soft tinge of early fall. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk. Kids rode bikes past us, and a couple sat on a bench holding hands like no one was watching. When I got home, I fed Jasper, cooked myself a modest dinner, pan-seared salmon, wild rice, steamed broccoli, and lit a candle, just because I liked the smell. I had no one to impress. No performance to put on. I existed for myself now, and that was more than enough. Later that night, I checked my email for the first time in days. Nothing urgent. Nothing dramatic. Except one new message. From Camille. The subject line was simple. Can we talk? I didn't open it. Didn't need to. The body was likely filled with regrets dressed up as reasons, memories masquerading as solutions. Maybe she'd realized the gravity of what she'd lost. Maybe she missed me. Or maybe, just maybe, she thought she could still negotiate her way back into a life she had no right to claim. I stared at the screen for a long time, then hit reply. One sentence. Some doors, once closed, stay locked. I clicked send. Then I deleted the thread, emptied the trash, closed the laptop. That night, as I slid into bed, Jasper curled at my feet. I didn't think about Camille. I didn't think about Wade or her parents or that cursed bay window back at the house that wasn't mine anymore. I thought about how light my chest felt. How easy it was to breathe when no one else was pressing their weight against your ribs. My house. My rules. My life. Finally,